There is a letter tucked inside the New Testament that does not ease you into its message. It does not begin with pleasantries or soft reassurances. It does not open with flattery or with the kind of warm, cushioning language that prepares a reader for something difficult by first making them feel entirely comfortable. It opens with a challenge. It moves immediately into confrontation. And it never truly lets up, not for a single paragraph, not for a single verse, until the very last word of the very last sentence has been written. That letter is the Epistle of James, and for 2,000 years it has been doing something that very few pieces of writing in human history have dared to do consistently and without apology. It tells you the truth about yourself, even when that truth is deeply uncomfortable, even when it stings, even when it illuminates something you have worked hard to keep hidden, even when it disrupts a version of yourself you have spent considerable energy constructing and maintaining. James was not writing to strangers. He was not addressing people who had wandered in off the street with no prior knowledge of God, no prior commitment, no prior experience of what it means to try to live by faith. He was writing to people who already believed. People who already gathered together in community, who already prayed, who already opened the scriptures together, who already called themselves followers of Jesus and meant it with genuine sincerity. And yet, and this is the thing that makes the letter so remarkable and so enduringly necessary, his message was urgent, almost desperately urgent, because he could see something that the people he was writing to seemed to have stopped seeing about themselves. He could see a gap, a dangerous, widening, quietly catastrophic gap between what those people professed and how they actually lived, between the faith they declared with their lips on the days they gathered and the lives they walked out every other day of the week, between the words they spoke in worship and the words they spoke to their neighbors, between the convictions they held in their minds and the choices they made with their money, their time, their tongues, and their treatment of the people around them. That gap is not unique to the first century. It is not a problem that belonged only to the scattered Jewish Christian communities to whom James was writing. If we are honest, truly, searchingly, uncomfortably honest, it is a gap that many of us know intimately from our own experience. We have sat in a service or in a quiet moment with an open Bible and felt the presence of something holy, felt the pull of something that wanted to change us, felt the warmth of a love we did not deserve. And then we have stepped back into the ordinary current of our days and discovered, sometimes within hours, how much distance there still is between the person we encounter in those holy moments and the person who shows up when the pressure is on. We have read a verse about loving our neighbors and then spent the evening cataloguing their faults. We have prayed for patience in the morning and shown none by afternoon. We have spoken blessings in one breath and sharp, dismissive, cutting words in the next. We have heard a sermon about the power of the tongue and then used ours to do damage before the week was out. James sees all of this. He sees it in the communities he leads. He sees it in the human heart, and he sees it in himself. And rather than look away, rather than offer a comforting theological framework that explains the gap while leaving it comfortably in place, he leans in closer and says with unmistakable clarity, "This must change, not eventually. Not when circumstances improve, or when you feel more spiritually prepared, or when you have sorted out a few other things first. Now. The faith you claim to have must become the life you actually live, and anything short of that is not a minor spiritual adjustment to be scheduled at your convenience. It is a contradiction that corrupts the whole enterprise." This is a study of 33 hard truths drawn from the book of James. Truths about the tongue and the way it governs the entire life. Truths about faith and the works that prove it is genuine. Truths about pride and the grace that only humility can receive. truths about money and its capacity to corrupt the soul that trusts in it, truths about how we treat the poor and what that treatment reveals about the depth of what we actually believe, truths about how we handle suffering and what that handling does to our character, truths about prayer and the conditions under which it becomes truly effective, and truths about the kind of integrated, wholehearted, outwardly expressed life that is genuinely transformed by the gospel rather than merely decorated by it. These are not easy lessons. Some of them will challenge things you have believed for years. Some will ask you to look at your relationships, your speech patterns, your habits, your priorities, and your daily choices with fresh and unflinching eyes. Some will disturb the peace of a faith that has become too comfortable, too settled, too neatly arranged to require the kind of costly daily whole-life surrender that James consistently describes. But every single one of them is offered in love. The love of a teacher who believes deeply that you are capable of more, who has seen too much genuine transformation in genuine people to accept that the gap between profession and practice is simply the permanent and unchangeable condition of human faith, and who refuses out of that love to let you settle for less than what God intends. Before we begin, take a moment to consider where you are sitting right now. You might be at home, in your car, on a long drive, in a quiet corner of an office, on a lunch break, lying awake at night when sleep will not come. You might be in another country entirely, halfway around the world from where this was recorded, in a time zone where it is already tomorrow. One of the most genuinely moving things about this content is the global family it has gathered around it. People from every continent, every cultural background, every life story, all drawn together by the same hunger. The hunger to know God better, to take His word more seriously, and to live more faithfully in the light of it. If that describes you, you are in exactly the right place, and we are deeply glad you are here. Before we go any further, we want to pause and say something genuinely and warmly from the heart. This channel exists because of people like you, people who are truly hungry for the word, who come back not out of habit but out of genuine desire for more, who are not satisfied with a surface-level engagement with faith, and who keep returning because something here speaks to what is deepest in them. If that is you, we want to ask you sincerely and with real emphasis, please subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. Not simply as a gesture, not simply as a number on a screen, but as a real expression of your commitment to this journey and your desire to be part of what is growing here. Every subscription tells us that this work matters, and it helps this content reach more people around the world who are searching for exactly what you have found here. A place where the word is taken seriously and where faith is expected to have real consequences for real life. Right now, in the comments below this video, drop a note and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Seriously, these comments matter to us deeply, and there is something genuinely extraordinary about seeing the places that appear. Lagos and London, São Paulo and Seoul, Mumbai and Melbourne, Chicago and Cape Town, and countless places in between, all gathered in the same space around the same ancient living word. You are not watching alone. You are part of something much larger than a single screen in a single room, and we want you to feel that sense of community and connection fully. And if you feel led to go even deeper into what this community has to offer, we warmly and enthusiastically invite you to become a channel member. Members step into an inner circle of this community. They receive early access to new videos. They get to be part of a growing family of people who are serious about their faith and serious about each other. And they help make it possible for this work to continue and to reach further. The link to join is right below this video, and we would be genuinely honored to have you with us. Now, let us open the book of James together. Let the truth come. Let it do what truth does when it is allowed to do its full work. Let it reveal, convict, comfort, challenge, and ultimately transform. Here are 33 hard truths from James to master your words and your life. Truth 1. Trials are not interruptions to your faith. They are the very process by which it is built. James opens his letter with a declaration that sounds, the first time you read it, almost impossible to take seriously. He writes in chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, "My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience." Count it all joy, not some of it. Not the parts that are manageable and proportionate and arrive with enough warning that you have time to prepare yourself spiritually before they land. All of it. The unexpected losses, the drawn-out seasons of waiting, the relationships that wound you, the circumstances that resist every effort you make to improve them, the prayers that seem to go unanswered for months and then for years. Count it all joy. This is the first hard truth James delivers, and he delivers it before the letter has barely begun, before he has introduced any of the other themes he will develop across 5 chapters, which tells you something vitally important about how foundational it is to everything that follows. If you do not understand what James is saying here, everything else he writes will feel like a demand without a foundation. But if you do understand it, if you genuinely grasp what he is teaching about the relationship between trials and spiritual growth, then everything else becomes not only manageable, but meaningful. James is not talking about manufactured positivity. He is not talking about the kind of forced, performative cheerfulness that puts on a brave face for an audience while the interior life is quietly collapsing. He is not asking you to pretend that pain is not real, that loss does not hurt, that the weight of certain seasons does not sometimes feel almost unbearable. The joy he is describing is not a feeling that arrives in place of grief or struggle. It is a deeper, more settled orientation of the heart, one that is capable of looking at hardship and seeing, beneath the surface of the difficulty, beneath the confusion and the exhaustion and the sense of things not going as they should, the purposeful hand of a God who does not waste anything, who does not allow his children to suffer without reason, and who is doing something in the difficulty that cannot be done any other way. The word translated as temptations here carries a broader meaning than the word usually suggests to modern readers. It refers not only to moral temptation, but to trials in the full and comprehensive sense, difficulties, pressures, hardships, the kinds of circumstances that test the structural integrity of what you believe. These are the seasons when the faith you have declared in comfortable, untested settings gets put under genuine load. When you discover whether what you said you believed is strong enough to bear the weight of actual life. And James says that this load-bearing, this testing, is not something to be avoided or prayed away without thought. It is the very mechanism through which patience is produced in the human soul. The word describes a quality of character that can only be developed through the experience of continuing under pressure. There is no shortcut to it. There is no version of it available to those who have never had anything to endure. Think about the people in your own life whose faith you most deeply respect, the people who seem unshakable, who carry a quality of peace in circumstances that would undo most of us, who have been through things that by any reasonable measure should have broken them and have come out the other side with a depth of trust in God that is almost tangible. Almost without exception, those people have a history of difficulty. Their composure is not accidental. It is not a personality trait they were born with. It is the fruit, painfully earned, carefully tended, of trials that were endured with faith. James is inviting you into that same process, not because suffering is good in itself, not because pain has intrinsic virtue, but because of what God is able to do with it, in it, through it, when you trust Him enough not to run from it before it has finished its work in you. The hard truth embedded in this opening verse is this: if you have been praying urgently and exclusively for the trial to end before it has completed what it came to complete, you may be praying with the best possible intentions against your own growth. That does not mean you cannot ask God for relief. It does not mean that asking for deliverance is faithless. God hears those prayers and answers them according to His wisdom. But it means holding the request with open hands, remaining genuinely willing to stay in the difficulty a little longer if that is what the refiner's fire requires, trusting that if the pressure has been permitted to continue, the Father who permitted it has not lost sight of you and has not abandoned the work He is doing in you through it. Truth 2. Asking God for wisdom requires a faith that does not waver. And most of us waver more than we know. The second truth James delivers is closely and deliberately connected to the first, arriving in verses 5 through 8 of chapter 1, and it contains one of the most extraordinary promises in the entire New Testament. He writes, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." The generosity of this promise is staggering when you stop to absorb it. God gives to all, not to the spiritually advanced, not to those who have achieved a sufficient level of biblical knowledge or devotional consistency. To all, liberally, without stinginess, without measure, without the reluctance of a person who is worried about running out. And without upbraiding, without the shaming, the lectures, the implication that you should have figured this out by now, that your need is an embarrassment, that your uncertainty reveals a failure for which you should feel ashamed. God does not make you feel foolish for coming to Him. The very act of asking is itself an act of humility, and humility is exactly what God responds to. But then comes the condition, and James states it with a directness that he does not soften or qualify. You must ask in faith, without wavering, because the person who asks and then immediately turns around and begins to operate entirely from their own calculations, who prays for wisdom and then makes decisions as if the prayer were irrelevant, who asks for guidance and then refuses to follow anything that does not align with what they had already decided, is like a wave on the sea. Pushed here by the wind, pulled there by the current, never settling on a direction, never arriving anywhere stable. And this person, James says, should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. A word of pastoral honesty is important here, because this verse has sometimes been used as a weapon against people who struggle with genuine doubt, as though any uncertainty, any honest wrestling with hard questions, any faith that does not feel absolutely certain in every moment, constitutes the wavering James is describing and disqualifies the person from receiving anything from God. That is a misreading of what James is saying, and it has caused real damage to real people who already carry enough self-condemnation. The person whose faith cries out, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief," is not the person James is describing. The honest questioner, the sincere wrestler, the person who brings their uncertainty to God rather than using it as a reason to stop praying, these are not the double-minded of whom James speaks. What James is describing is a split allegiance, a divided loyalty, a person who has not yet fully decided at the level of practical, daily decision-making reality who is actually in charge of their life. They ask God with one part of themselves and operate entirely independently of Him with the other. They maintain a nominal relationship with the divine while the actual governance of their choices remains entirely their own. That posture is not primarily an intellectual problem. It is a loyalty problem, a trust problem, and it does not produce answered prayer. Not because God is petty or easily offended, but because prayer is by its very nature an act of surrender, a genuine placing of yourself in the hands of another. and you cannot truly surrender to someone you are simultaneously trying to maneuver around. Truth 3. Poverty and wealth are both invitations to the same posture, and that posture is humility. Verses 9 through 11 of the first chapter contain a teaching that cuts across the entire economic spectrum with equalizing force. James writes, "Let the brother of low degree rejoice in that he is exalted, but the rich in that he is made low, because as the flower of the grass he shall pass away. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his ways." Both the poor believer and the wealthy one are called to rejoice, but in opposite things. The one with very little material security is invited to rejoice in their elevation, in the reality that in the kingdom of God their worth is immeasurable, that they have been made rich in faith and in relationship with the Creator of the universe, that the marginalization they may experience in the social and economic structures of this world is not the final word on their significance or their standing. The one with material abundance is invited to rejoice in their humbling, in the reminder, which the wealthy need more than most, that none of what they have accumulated is permanent, that wealth is as temporary as a flower blooming in the summer heat before the burning wind comes and carries it away. Both are called to the same posture, humility. Both are freed from the same trap, the trap of building an identity on economic standing rather than on who they are before God. And both are offered the same liberation, the liberation of knowing that what matters most about them cannot be taken away by the market, by misfortune, by the changing tides of circumstance or social standing. This is a hard truth for both groups, and it is worth sitting with the hardness honestly. For those who are genuinely struggling financially, there is often a corrosive temptation to read material poverty as spiritual poverty, to believe, perhaps without ever articulating it clearly, that your circumstances reflect your worth in God's eyes, that if you were more faithful or more righteous or more spiritually significant, things would look different. James pushes back on this throughout his entire letter with great force. For those with material wealth, there is an equally powerful and often less examined temptation to read comfort as confirmation, a subtle, seldom spoken but deeply operative belief that your prosperity is a reflection of your righteousness, that your comfort signals God's particular favor. The burning wind of the flower image is James's gentle but unmistakable correction of that belief. The grass withers, the flower falls, the beauty of it perishes, and the rich man fades away in the very midst of his pursuits, not as a punishment, but as a simple and universal reality that no amount of wealth has ever successfully negotiated around. Truth 4. God does not tempt you, and understanding where temptation actually comes from will change how you fight it. Chapter 1, verses 13 through 15, contains one of the most important clarifications in the entire letter, and it carries consequences that extend into every area of the Christian life. James addresses the question of moral temptation, and he is precise, even clinical, in his identification of its origin. He writes, "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." The hard truth here begins with the removal of every external source of blame. James will not allow the escape of attributing moral failure to God. God's character is entirely and absolutely consistent. He is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. He does not use evil as a tool. He does not set traps. He does not arrange circumstances specifically designed to pull you into sin. The trial he permits may be difficult and the pressure may be genuine, but it is never corrupt. What does the pulling is your own desire. The word translated as lust refers to any powerful, self-driven craving, any strong internal want that operates independently of wisdom, that has moved outside the boundaries of its proper place and begun to demand what it has not been given and will not be given by legitimate means. These desires are not always obvious and dramatic. Sometimes they are desires for good things, for recognition, for security, for love and belonging, for comfort, that have grown disordered, that have begun to govern the soul rather than serve it. When that happens, those desires become the mechanism through which sin enters. James traces the progression with precision. Desire conceives. When it has fully formed, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it has run its full course, brings death. This is a description of a process that plays out in human lives every single day, in recognizable stages. The person who ends up in devastation did not arrive there in a single dramatic step. There was a progression, a series of moments when a desire was entertained rather than examined, when temptation was given hospitality rather than resistance, until what began as a passing thought became a pattern, and what became a pattern became a destiny. The freedom in this truth is that it places the origin of the problem in a place where grace can reach it. You can, by the ongoing work of the Holy Spirit in your interior life, begin to address the disordered desires within you, not primarily by suppression, but by transformation, by allowing the love of God and the wisdom of God to so occupy the interior of your life that the desires themselves begin to reorder around what is good and true and genuinely satisfying. Truth 5. Every good thing in your life has a source, and knowing that source will change how you hold it. Verse 17 of chapter 1 speaks one of the most generous truths in the entire letter. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. God is absolutely consistent. He does not have good days and bad days. He does not give generously in one season and withdraw in another. Every good gift, every perfect gift, not the religious gifts only, but every genuine good in your experience, traces its origin to the Father of lights. The talent you exercise with such pleasure, the relationships that have brought you the greatest joy, the moments of beauty that have stopped you in your tracks, the health that lets you do what you love, all of it, without exception, comes from above. The demanding dimension is in the implication. If everything good came from him, then nothing good was self-generated. The pride that accumulates around ability and achievement, the belief that you are the primary author of the good things in your life, that they are owed to you because you earned them, is exposed by this verse as a profound misunderstanding of reality. You received what you have. The seed of it was given. The opportunity to cultivate it was given. The circumstances that allowed it to flourish were given. This has practical implications for how you hold the good things in your life. The person who understands that every good gift comes from above holds their gifts with open hands rather than a clenched fist. They share generously rather than hoarding protectively. They are not destroyed when something good is lost, because their security was never in the gift itself, but in the giver. And they live in a state of ongoing conscious gratitude, not the kind performed at appropriate moments, but the kind that is the permanent background tone of a life that has understood where everything comes from. Truth 6. The order of quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger is not accidental, and getting it wrong costs more than you think. Verse 19 of chapter 1 is a verse many people can recite. Far fewer have genuinely practiced it. James writes, Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. 3 instructions, 1 sentence, an order that is not incidental but deeply purposeful. Problems of destructive speech and problems of destructive anger are almost always downstream of a failure to truly listen. We speak too quickly because we have not truly heard. We have heard the surface of the other person's words and immediately filtered them through our own assumptions, our own needs, our own defensive reactions. And from that filtered, incomplete picture, we generate a response. And then we wonder why the response made things worse. We grow angry because we are operating from incomplete information. We have assumed an intent that was never there. We have constructed a story about what just happened from the raw material of our own wounds and fears, rather than from the full reality of another person's experience. And we respond to our own story with the force of genuine injury, while the other person stands bewildered, watching us react to something that did not happen in the way we experienced it. James adds in verse 20 a clarification that punctures a very common spiritual justification. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. How many conflicts have been entered, how many relationships damaged, under the banner of righteous indignation? James is not saying that righteous anger does not exist, but he is saying that the anger of human beings, however dressed in the language of holy principle, almost never produces God's righteous purposes. The hard truth is that most of what we dress up as righteous anger is our own hurt, our own pride, or our own desire to win. And James says plainly, that kind of anger does not work the righteousness of God. Truth 7. Hearing without doing is not incomplete obedience. It is a form of active self-deception. Verses 22 through 25 of chapter 1 contain one of the most vivid images in the entire letter. James writes, "But be ye doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed." The picture of the man with the mirror is worth dwelling on. He saw something that needed addressing, he registered it, and then he walked away and immediately forgot. Not deliberately, not defiantly. He simply failed to hold on to what the mirror showed him long enough to do anything about it. The information was received and then lost. James says this is what happens when people hear the word of God without allowing it to translate into action. And he names it for exactly what it is, not a minor spiritual inefficiency, but self-deception. The person who hears and does not do is actively deceiving themselves about the nature of what they have received. They have encountered truth, real, living, transformative truth, and have managed to leave the encounter unchanged, and then have walked away believing that the encounter counted for something. James says it did not in the way that ultimately matters. The contrast is precise. The one who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it will be blessed in what they do, not in what they know, not in what they intend, in what they do. The blessing is inseparable from the obedience. Truth 8. The quality of your religion will be measured by what you do for the people who cannot do anything for you in return. Verses 26 and 27 of chapter 1 have the quality of a verdict. James writes, "If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world." The word vain deserves careful attention. Empty, without substance, of no real value. James is not saying that the religious practices of the person who cannot control their tongue are somewhat diminished. He is saying they are empty. The worship, the prayer, the gathering, the tithing, the doctrinal correctness, the spiritual vocabulary, all of it, in the absence of a transformed tongue and a genuinely caring heart toward the vulnerable, amounts to nothing before God. And then James defines pure religion, not in terms of doctrinal content or the frequency of religious observance, but in terms of practical action toward the most vulnerable, the fatherless and widows, the people most exposed to poverty, most vulnerable to exploitation, most likely to fall through every safety net. And James says, your religion, your actual, real, God-assessed religion, will be measured significantly by your relationship to those people, not what you feel for them, not what you intend, what you actually tangibly, practically do for them. Truth 9, favoritism in the church is not a social problem. It is a theological betrayal of everything the gospel establishes. Chapter 2 opens with a specific and recognizable scene. A person dressed in fine clothing is shown to the best seat with deference and warmth. A person in shabby clothing is told to stand or sit on the floor, and James does not treat this as a failure of social etiquette. He treats it as a violation of something foundational. He asks, are ye not then partial in yourselves, and are become judges with evil thoughts? Favoritism in the community of faith is judgment operating from a corrupted standard, a standard borrowed from the surrounding culture, which judges people's worth by their economic standing, their social connections, their appearance, their usefulness, and imported, largely unexamined, into the house of God, where an entirely different standard is supposed to operate. James makes the theological stakes explicit. God has chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, to treat the poor with contempt, to overlook them, to arrange the community so that the wealthy are honored and the poor marginalized. This is to dishonor the very people God has particularly chosen. It is to run directly counter to the values of the kingdom you claim to belong to. It is to take the world's hierarchy, which the gospel explicitly and decisively overturns, and reinstall it inside the church as though the overturning had never happened. Truth 10. The royal law has no loopholes, no exceptions, and no room for selective application. Verse 8 of chapter 2 names the supreme standard, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And then James closes every exit. He says in verses 10 and 11 that if a person keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in just one point, they are guilty of all of it. The law is not a collection of independent regulations that can be obeyed selectively. It is the expression of a single, unified character, the character of God, and to violate any part of it is to violate the principle from which all of it flows: love. You cannot be scrupulously honest in your business dealings while being casually cruel in your private speech. You cannot be generous with your money while being contemptuous of the people your money could serve. You cannot guard your sexual integrity while harboring murderous hatred towards someone who has wronged you. These are not separate ledgers that balance independently. They are different expressions of the same underlying commitment, and a commitment that shows up in some places and disappears in others is not a genuine commitment. It is a selective performance of virtue in the areas where virtue is most comfortable. The invitation here is to wholeness, to an integrated life in which the public version and the private version, the Sunday morning version and the Tuesday afternoon version, the version that shows up in easy relationships and the version that shows up in costly ones, are increasingly, genuinely the same person. This is what transformation looks like. This is what it means when the gospel has moved from the mind, where it is received, down into the deep interior of the soul, where the actual governance of the life takes place. Truth 11. Faith that has no works is not weak. Faith, it is dead faith, and James does not allow for a softer diagnosis. Verses 14 through 26 of chapter 2 contain the most famous passage in all of James. James writes, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works? Can faith save him?" The key phrase is, though a man say. James is not asking whether genuine, transforming, God-given faith saves. He is asking whether the kind of faith that produces absolutely nothing, no change in behavior, no response to human need, no difference in how the person actually lives, is genuine faith at all. His answer is no. That kind of faith is not weak faith. It is dead faith. It is the corpse of what faith should be. The example he chooses is devastating in its clarity. A brother or sister is naked and hungry. Someone who professes faith says to them, "Depart in peace, be warmed, be filled." Everything is linguistically correct. Peace is a good thing. Warmth is a good thing. But the person is still cold. The person is still hungry. And the words have not addressed the reality in any way that makes any difference. What is the prophet? He introduces Abraham as an example, not of someone who earned righteousness through deeds, but of someone whose faith was so genuinely real that when the moment of supreme testing came, the faith moved. It acted. It expressed itself in something costly and visible. Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac was not the work that replaced faith. It was the work through which the faith was made complete, in which the interior reality of his trust in God became fully expressed in an exterior act. The faith and the work were the inside and the outside of one living reality. And the hard truth is simply this: genuine faith by its very nature is a living thing. And living things move. Truth 12. The tongue is the smallest member of the body and the most consequential, and almost no one treats it as though both are true. Chapter 3 opens with a claim that deserves to be read slowly more than once. James writes, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body." A person who does not sin in what they say is a perfect person capable of mastery over the whole of their bodily life. What you allow yourself to say is both a symptom of your interior condition and a shaper of it. The tongue is not merely a reporting instrument. It is an active participant in forming what is happening inside you. James reaches for 3 consecutive images. The horse's bit, a small piece of metal that turns an entire animal of 1,000 pounds. The ship's rudder, a tiny surface area beneath the waterline that steers a vessel vastly larger than itself. And fire, behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. Fire is the image James dwells on most, and for good reason. The bit and the rudder illustrate the tongue's power to direct. Fire illustrates the tongue's power to destroy far beyond the scale of its origin. A fire starts small, and then, if nothing intervenes, it spreads. It catches things that were not meant to burn. It travels in directions the original spark had no intention of traveling. A word spoken in 3 seconds can do damage that lasts 3 decades. The hard truth is the magnitude of the disproportion, the smallness of the act of speaking, and the potentially vast, lasting, and irreversible reach of its consequences. Truth 13. The person who blesses God and curses people made in God's image is living in a contradiction that ought not to be. Verses 9 through 12 of chapter 3 press James's analysis of the tongue to its most theologically acute point. He writes, "Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be." James reaches for natural images to make the incongruity vivid. Does a spring send forth from the same opening both fresh water and salt water? Does a fig tree produce olives? Does a grapevine bear figs? In the natural world, a thing produces according to its nature. A healthy spring does not intermittently deliver poison. What a source consistently produces is the most reliable indicator of what that source actually is at its essential level. The mouth that worships God with one set of words and destroys the people made in God's image with another is not simply being inconsistent. It is revealing something about the interior source from which both outputs originate. Worship that coexists comfortably with chronic cruelty in speech, with gossip, contempt, the dismissal and diminishment of the vulnerable, is worship that needs to be examined for whether it is genuine. Not because God is not moved by sincere praise, but because sincere praise flows from a heart that is being genuinely transformed. And a heart being genuinely transformed does not remain indifferent to the damage its words do to people who bear the image of the God it claims to adore. Truth. 14. There are two kinds of wisdom, two entirely different sets of motivations, and the difference between them determines the shape of your entire life. Verses 13 through 18. Of chapter 3, draw one of the sharpest contrasts in the entire letter. Earthly wisdom, the organizing principle of a life ultimately governed by self-interest, is characterized by bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. Its fruits give it away. Where jealousy and selfish ambition are the hidden engines of a life, the output is disorder and every vile practice. James names this wisdom as earthly, unspiritual, and demonic, operating in alignment with the anti-kingdom forces that oppose God's purposes. The wisdom that comes from above is described with 8 qualities: pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. Together, they form a character portrait of a very specific and beautiful kind of person, the person in whom the wisdom of God is genuinely operating. The hard truth here is that several of these qualities are misread as weakness in many cultural environments. Gentleness is not valued in cultures that prize dominance. Being genuinely open to reason is not celebrated in communities where certainty is worn as a badge of strength. Willingness to yield is easily exploited in environments where everyone else is insisting on their rights. And yet James says, these are the marks of divine wisdom at work. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace, not in conflict, not in the relentless assertion of one's own perspective, in peace. Truth. 15. Your conflicts are not primarily about the other person. They are about the desires operating inside you. Chapter 4 opens with 2 diagnostic questions. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lusts that war in your members? These conflicts do not originate primarily in the failure of the other person. They originate in the desires operating within each party. You want something and do not have it. You desire something and cannot obtain it. You covet and quarrel and fight. Even the prayer that accompanies these situations is corrupted. You ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, intending to spend what you receive on the satisfaction of your own cravings rather than on the purposes of God. The hard and unsettling truth in this passage is the invitation to turn inward before turning outward when conflict arises. Before cataloging the ways in which the other person has failed, erred, or provoked you, examine your own desires. What were you wanting in this situation that you are not getting? What expectation was operating in you, declared or undeclared, that the other person has failed to fulfill? What sense of entitlement or craving is driving the disproportionate force of your response? This is not an invitation to self-blame. It is an invitation to self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the necessary first condition of genuine change. Truth. 16. Friendship with the world is not a neutral choice. It actively positions you against God. Verse 4 of chapter 4 is one of the sharpest verses in the letter. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. The language of adultery invokes the full weight of what it means to have been brought into an exclusive covenant relationship with the living God, and then to give primary devotion to another. The friendship of the world James describes is about primary loyalty, about what ultimately governs your decisions at the deepest level, what standard you measure your success by, whose approval you need in order to feel that your life is working. The person who is living primarily for the things the world prizes, wealth, status, the comfort of fitting in, the affirmation of those who do not share their faith, has placed their primary loyalty with the world. And James says that this placement constitutes enmity with God, not mild disappointment, not diminished relationship, enmity. The friendship of the world and the friendship of God are opposed orientations, and you are always more toward one than the other. The question is which direction you are facing and which direction your life is actually moving. Truth. 17. God gives more grace than any situation requires, but only to those who have stopped relying on themselves. Verse 6 of chapter 4 offers one of the most beautiful responses to one of the most devastating diagnoses in the whole letter. God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. And then immediately, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. God's posture toward pride is resistance, active, directional opposition. Pride is the state of the soul that has placed itself at the center, that has concluded it is sufficient to itself, that has stopped looking up because it believes it already possesses what it needs. Into that posture, grace cannot flow. The self-sufficiency of pride leaves no opening for what God wants to give. Humility, understood rightly, is not self-deprecation. It is an accurate assessment of reality, the recognition that everything you have came from somewhere beyond yourself, that you are not sufficient to yourself, that the life you were created for requires ongoing, daily, genuine dependence on the one who created you for it. Into that posture, grace flows abundantly. The practical instruction is sequential and deliberate. Submission to God comes first. The power to resist what opposes you flows from the posture of submission. Humility is not passive. In the economy of the kingdom, it is one of the most dynamically powerful postures available to a human being. Truth. 18. Drawing near to God is simple, available, right now, and requires nothing more than genuine movement in His direction. Verse 8 of chapter 4 contains a promise of direct simplicity. Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. Whatever ground has been lost through any of the things James has described, the path back is available. It is not conditional on a complex sequence of preparatory achievements. It is simply movement toward God, genuine, intentional movement. And the promise attached to that movement is absolute. He will draw near to you. But drawing near is not a passive drift. The verses surrounding it make clear that it involves the willingness to see clearly what has come between you and God, and to grieve it genuinely. Not in a spirit of self-condemnation from which there is no recovery, but with the honest grief that genuine love feels when it recognizes its own failures. And in response to that, to the turning, to the mourning, to the genuine reorientation of the soul, the promise holds, He will draw near. Truth. 19. Every time you pass judgment on your brother, you are sitting in a seat that belongs to someone else. Entirely, verses 11 and 12 of chapter 4 Return to speech with philosophical precision. James writes, "Speak not evil one of another, brethren. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another?" When you pass condemning judgment on a fellow believer, you are not simply being unkind. You are placing yourself above the law that says to love your neighbor. You are acting as though you have the authority to set aside its requirement in this instance. And in doing that, you have made yourself not a subject of the law, but a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver with the perfect knowledge and perfect justice necessary to judge without corruption. And James's question deserves an honest answer. Who are you? What do you know about this person's interior life, their history, the full context of their choices, the battles they are fighting invisibly, that gives you the standing to render the verdict you are rendering? The hard truth, answered honestly, is not enough, not nearly enough. Truth 20. Your life is a mist, and that reality, received rightly, is not a source of anxiety, but of freedom. Verses 13 through 15. Of chapter 4 address a form of presumption so embedded in modern life that we have largely stopped recognizing it as a spiritual problem. James writes, "Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, If the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that." James is not criticizing planning. The problem he is addressing is the spirit in which the planning is done, a spirit that has quietly removed God from the picture and replaced him with the self as the primary agent, whose intentions will determine what happens next. The life that is a vapor is not a depressing image if received rightly. You are not required to carry the future. You were never designed to carry it. What is asked is not the anxious stewardship of every possible tomorrow, but the faithful, present, open-handed inhabiting of today, held by the posture that says, "If the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that." That posture is not passivity. It is the posture of a person who has correctly understood the relationship between their intentions and God's sovereignty and has found peace in that understanding. Truth 21. Not doing the good. You know you should do is its own category of sin, and it is the one we most rarely confess. Verse 17 of chapter 4 is brief, but carries enormous weight. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. The traditional vocabulary of guilt and confession focuses on sins of commission. James here names sins of omission with equal moral gravity, the good that was known and not done. The neighbor who was clearly struggling and was never reached out to. The injustice that was visible and was never spoken against. The gift or resource that was given to be used for others' flourishing and was kept entirely for oneself. The relationship that needed repair and the conversation that was perpetually postponed. The person in genuine need who was told warmly that you were praying for them while nothing more concrete was offered. These are not failures of dramatic proportion. They feel like nothing, an absence, a silence, a space where something should have been, but James insists on the moral weight of that nothing. The good that was not done was real. Its absence is real. And the person who had the capacity, the knowledge, and the opportunity to do it and chose otherwise through busyness or indifference or fear will answer for that choice. Truth 22. The wealth that is accumulated, while others suffer, is not security. It is evidence building against you. Chapter 5 opens with the most severe passage in the entire letter. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. The rust of the unused, hoarded wealth is a witness. The wealth is condemned because it has been retained while workers who created it were denied their wages, while the luxury of the few was built on the deprivation of the many, while the cries of the exploited were ascending to the ears of the Lord of hosts. The rust of the gold and silver is not merely a sign of waste, it is testimony. It will be brought into the accounting as evidence of what the wealth was used for, and what it was conspicuously and persistently not used for. This passage asks of those who have been given much, in whose interest is your abundance operating? Whose lives are better because you have what you have? Material wealth is morally neutral in itself, but morally charged in its use. And the use to which it is put, or the use to which it is conspicuously not put, is being noted by a God whose particular care for the poor and exploited runs through the entire arc of Scripture from beginning to end. Truth. 23. Patience is not the absence of pain or the performance of contentment. It is the deliberate choice to remain faithful, under weight. Verses 7 through 11 of chapter 5 turn from the severe address to the exploitative wealthy and offer sustained, tender encouragement to the suffering believers. James writes, "Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, stablish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh." The farmer has done the work, the plowing, the planting, the tending. They have invested everything they have in a harvest they cannot produce themselves. And then they wait, not passively, but with a fundamental recognition that the critical variable, the rain and the growth, is not in their hands. It is in the hands of someone whose timing may not match their schedule, but whose faithfulness has never ultimately failed. The farmer does not dig up the seed to check on its progress. They trust the process. They continue to tend what they can. And they wait with the kind of active, working patience that is far more demanding and far more productive than passive resignation. James names Job as the exemplar of this patience, and Job famously was not serene. He argued loudly. He questioned profoundly. He lamented with enormous force. What Job refused to do was abandon his fundamental trust in the goodness of the one he was wrestling with. He stayed in the relationship even when it was confusing and painful. And at the end of the Lord, as James calls it, there was restoration, and the Lord was revealed to be full of compassion and mercy. The hard truth is not that patience makes suffering easy. It is that patience makes suffering purposeful. And purposeful suffering endured with trust is the raw material from which the deepest and most durable faith is made. Truth 24. Grumbling against each other is what communities do when they are under pressure, and James names it. Directly as a danger, verse 9 of chapter 5 contains a warning that could only have been written by someone who had watched suffering communities with careful attention. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. This is the specific temptation that arises in communities under sustained and extended pressure. When a group of people has been suffering for a long time, the frustration and exhaustion of each individual needs somewhere to go. And too often it goes inward, into the community itself. People who should be each other's greatest support begin to take out their weariness on each other. Small conflicts that in lighter seasons would be easily resolved become entrenched. The community that was supposed to be the space of shared endurance becomes instead a theater of accumulated grievances. James names it directly, "Do not grumble against one another." Suffering does not provide moral cover for mutual cruelty. The community under pressure is called not just to endure what comes from outside, but to maintain, with intention and care, the love within. Patience is required not only toward circumstances, but toward the people who are enduring those circumstances alongside you. Truth 25. Your yes should mean yes. And the fact that we need to be told. This reveals something important. Verse 12 of chapter 5 is framed with gravity. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. The phrase, above all things, signals priority. James considers the integrity of speech, the alignment between what you say and what you mean and what you do, to be a matter of fundamental importance. The practice of oath swearing existed because ordinary speech had become unreliable enough that extra mechanisms were needed to signal when someone was actually serious. James is pointing to a more demanding and more beautiful vision, a community in which oaths are structurally unnecessary because every person's word is simply and reliably true, where a yes means yes not because of any external mechanism, but because this person is genuinely the same on Tuesday as they were on Sunday, under pressure as in comfort, when the commitment turns out to be more costly than anticipated, as when it is exactly what they expected. The integrity of a community's speech is a direct reflection of the depth of its transformation, and the degree to which we need mechanisms to ensure that people follow through on their commitments is a measure of how far the interior work still has to go. Truth 26. Prayer must come before everything else, and the order reveals where your practical trust actually lives. Verse 13 of chapter 5 presents a clear and challenging instruction. Is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any merry? Let him sing psalms. When the verse says let him pray, it means let that be the first movement, before the phone call to the trusted friend, before the research, before the strategies and plans and attempts to engineer a solution through your own competence. First, pray. This forces an honest reckoning with where your practical trust actually lives, not your declared trust. Almost all of us would describe that as fully in God. Your practical trust, the revealed by your behavior trust, the what you actually reach for first trust. For most of us, prayer comes at some point, often sincerely, but not first. First, we reach for the mechanisms of our own competence. And the distance between praying first and praying at some point is the distance between a life that is genuinely structurally dependent on God and a life that is functionally self-reliant with a sincere devotional dimension added on. Truth 27. The prayer of faith is categorically different from the performance of prayer. And James says only one of them heals. Verses 14 and 15 of chapter 5 describe the specific and ancient practice of calling the elders, anointing with oil, praying in faith over the sick, and James attaches a promise, and the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. The phrase, the prayer of faith, is doing essential work, not the prayer of ritual. Not the prayer of hedging, which acknowledges all the theological reasons why healing might not come, and thereby reduces itself to something that cannot be held responsible for any outcome. The prayer of faith, the prayer offered in genuine, expectant, vulnerable trust in the willingness and ability of God to act. This is genuinely demanding because it requires a kind of exposure that the performance of prayer does not require. It treats God as genuinely present, genuinely listening, and genuinely capable of doing what is being asked. And it requires the humility of holding that expectation without demanding a particular outcome on a particular timeline, because God's wisdom remains higher than ours, and the sovereignty that we trust is real sovereignty, not a rubber stamp on our requests. Truth 28. Confessing your faults to one another is not a sign of weakness. It is the pathway to a healing that isolation will never provide. Verse 16 of chapter 5 is one of the most countercultural and least practiced verses in the entire New Testament. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. The instruction is mutual and unconditional. Confess to one another, with the expectation that what is shared will be received with prayer rather than judgment. The stated purpose is healing, the genuine restoration of what has been broken in the interior life of the person who confesses, and this healing is connected to the quality of prayer that honest, specific confession makes possible. When you know what you are actually praying for, when someone has trusted you with their real struggle rather than a sanitized version, the prayer you offer is not generic. It is intercession. It enters the specific gap. It carries the specific weight. The hard truth is how rarely this exists in Christian community. We have learned to present the version of ourselves that is managing well, struggling only with things that are socially acceptable to struggle with. The result is communities full of isolated people, each convinced that their private battles are uniquely serious and shameful, while everyone around them presents a composed exterior and quietly suffers alone. James is describing the antidote. It requires courage, trust, and the grace to receive without weaponizing. And it produces the kind of healing that composed exteriors and private struggles will never provide on their own. Truth 29. Ordinary people with earnest faith move things, and the example of Elijah was chosen specifically to remove every excuse you might have for expecting less. Verses 17 and 18 of chapter 5 introduce the prophet Elijah with a crucial framing. Elias was a man subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it might not rain. And it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. Before naming the extraordinary result, James establishes the baseline condition, subject to like passions as we are, the same emotional vulnerabilities, the same capacity for fear and exhaustion and doubt. We know from 1 Kings that Elijah, who called down fire from heaven and whose prayer withheld the rain of a nation, also fled in terror from a single threatening letter, asked God to end his life, and declared himself the last faithful person in all of Israel. He was not a figure of supernatural composure. He was a person of ordinary human frailty, and yet he prayed with extraordinary earnestness, and the weather responded. James makes this juxtaposition with total deliberateness. The limitation on your prayer life is not that you are too ordinary, too broken, too consistently inconsistent. Elijah was as ordinary and as broken as you are. What he brought to prayer was not a different nature, but a different earnestness, a different quality of sincerity and whole person investment. And the hard truth is that this earnestness is available to you right now in the next conversation you have with God. Truth 30. The person who wanders from truth is not too far gone, and the one who goes after them is doing something of eternal weight. Verses 19 and 20 of chapter 5 close the letter with a commission. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. The word err describes wandering, gradual, accumulative drift. Not dramatic apostasy, but the quiet distance that grows when a person stops engaging, stops returning, stops coming back. Someone who was once present has become absent. Someone who was once warm has gone cold. They have not renounced their faith with a declaration. They have simply drifted, carried by currents of disappointment, unaddressed doubt, unhealed hurt, discouragement that found no community to absorb it. James assigns responsibility for this person not to a professional, but to the community. If any of you sees someone erring, go and turn them back. The language he uses for the consequence is ultimate. Saving a soul from death, covering a multitude of sins. These are the highest possible stakes, and the hard truth is in how rarely we actually do this. We notice the drifting, we feel concern, and then we wait, tell ourselves they know where to find us. James is calling for something more costly and more direct, the willingness to go, not with a lecture, not with correction first, but with presence, with the simple, powerful act of saying, I see you, you are missed. Come back. Truth 31. The whole life is what the world is actually watching. And James knew this long before anyone had language for it, woven through the entire letter of James, not as a single extractable passage, but as the consistent undergirding logic of every argument he makes is the recognition that the life of a person who names the name of Jesus is itself a kind of proclamation. Not the proclamation made with words, though that matters. The proclamation made by the pattern of the whole life, sustained across the full range of ordinary circumstances, visible to people who would never voluntarily sit down to hear a theological argument. When a person who claims to follow Jesus treats every person they encounter with genuine, equal dignity, regardless of their economic standing, that is a proclamation. When they can be known for the consistency of their word across years and different circumstances, that is a proclamation. When they handle conflict with a gentleness that the world does not expect and cannot explain, that is a proclamation. When they use whatever platform or resources or influence they have in the service of people who cannot return the favor, that is a proclamation. When they are genuinely the same person in private that they are in public, in the costly seasons as in the comfortable ones, that is a proclamation that no argument can match. This is what James has been building toward from the very first verse. Not a moral checklist, not behaviors to perform in order to qualify. A vision of integrated whole-life faith, faith that has moved from the head where it is known, through the heart where it is loved, all the way into the hands and the feet and the tongue where it is actually lived. Truth 32. The tongue's greatest battle is not against others. It is the war. It wages against the self you are becoming. This truth, drawn from the whole arc of James's teaching on speech, deserves to be drawn out as its own distinct reality, because it illuminates something that the other speech-related truths leave in the background. James says in chapter 3 that if a person can bridle their tongue, they are a perfect person capable of controlling the whole body. The direction of causation runs in both directions simultaneously. You bridle your tongue because you are a person of developed interior character, and you develop interior character by bridling your tongue. What you allow yourself to say shapes what you allow yourself to think. What you allow yourself to think shapes what you allow yourself to believe. What you allow yourself to believe determines the direction your life moves over time. The person who has formed the habit of speaking complaint, narrating their experience primarily through the lens of what is wrong, what has been done to them, what is not working, is rehearsing and reinforcing a narrative. Every repetition makes that narrative more settled, more automatic, more determinative of how the next set of circumstances will be received. Conversely, the person who disciplines their speech toward gratitude, toward faith, toward the consistent naming of God's goodness, even in the middle of genuine difficulty, is doing something to their own soul that goes deeper than the words themselves. They are choosing the narrative they will inhabit. They are deciding, through the accumulated pattern of their speech, who they are in the process of becoming. This is the deliberate, disciplined practice of aligning what you say with what you want to become. trusting that the becoming will deepen as the saying continues. Truth 33. The whole life, every word, every choice, every relationship, every act of service is the evidence that your faith is either alive or it is not. The 33rd hard truth drawn from the book of James is not a single verse. It is the conclusion toward which every other truth in this letter has been building, the point to which every individual lesson has been pointing from the beginning. It is simply this: the faith you say you have will be made visible one way or another by the life you actually live. There is nowhere to hide. There is no protected private interior space where genuine faith can remain permanently invisible. Faith is a living thing, and living things, by definition, inevitably, without exception, produce something. They move, they grow, they act, they leave evidence of their existence in the world around them. James has not written a letter about behavior management. He has written a letter about faith, what it actually is, at its deepest level, where it actually lives, how it actually works, and what it actually produces when it is genuine. Every passage about the tongue is about whether the interior transformation the gospel promises is real enough to have reached the faculty of speech. Every passage about the treatment of the poor is about whether the love of God has actually taken up residence in the heart, or is merely renting intellectual space. Every passage about prayer is about whether the relationship with God that faith claims is actual enough to be the first place you go when you are in need. The life James describes in all of its demanding, costly, integrated wholeness is not the result of human effort applied to the project of becoming a better person. It is the natural, increasing, imperfect but genuine output of a life that has been genuinely encountered by grace. The grace that humbles pride, the grace that disciplines desire, the grace that makes patience possible under weight that would otherwise crush, the grace that turns the tongue from instrument of destruction to instrument of healing. It does not happen all at once. It is not completed in a season or a year or a decade. It is the work of a lifetime, ongoing, non-linear, full of regression and restoration, but it is real. This is what it looks like when faith is alive, not a vapor in the wind, not a flower that blooms briefly under favorable conditions and disappears when the heat comes. A tree planted by streams of water, bearing its fruit in its season, its leaves not withering, and in whatever it does, prospering. Not in every temporal measure, not according to every worldly metric of success, but in the ways that matter most and last longest. In the quality of its love, the integrity of its speech, the consistency of its character, the generosity of its service, the depth of its patience, and the unwavering quality of its trust in the one from whom every good and perfect gift has always come and always will. A deeper reflection. What James means for the way we actually speak every day before closing, it is worth stepping back and considering something that threads its way through nearly every one of the 33 truths we have explored together. Something so pervasive in the letter of James that it might be called the heartbeat of the whole work. It is the question of speech, the question of words. The question of what comes out of the mouth and what the pattern of what comes out of the mouth reveals about the condition of what is happening inside. James returns to this theme more persistently than to any other. He mentions the tongue and the danger of uncontrolled speech in the very first chapter, returns to it in the second, devotes an extended portion of the third chapter to it, references it again in the fourth, and closes with it even in the fifth. You cannot read this letter without the growing conviction that James considers the way we speak to be among the most significant indicators of the state of the soul. Not an isolated virtue to be added to the list, but a window, perhaps the clearest window available, into the interior condition of the person who is speaking. Why does the tongue matter so much to James? There are several reasons, and each one rewards careful thought. The first reason is that the tongue is hard to fake consistently. You can maintain a performance of patience, of generosity, of theological correctness for stretches of time, in the right settings, with the right audience, when you are rested and not under pressure. But the tongue, under unexpected pressure, reveals what is actually inside. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when a project you have invested in goes wrong, when someone says something in a meeting that embarrasses you, when a friend says something you did not expect and that stings, what comes out in those moments is not the performance. It is the interior reality. The tongue, in its unguarded moments, tells the truth about the soul in ways that carefully managed behavior often cannot. The second reason the tongue matters so much to James is that it is disproportionately consequential. He makes this point at length in chapter 3, and it cannot be overstated. A word spoken in 3 seconds can carry a weight that lasts for 30 years. The encouragement given to a child at the right moment can shape a trajectory. The dismissal given to that same child at the wrong moment can create a wound that resurfaces across decades of adult life. The judgment pronounced on someone's potential, "You're not built for this. You'll never change. You're too much. You're not enough," can function as a cage, limiting the range of motion of a life long after the person who spoke it has forgotten they ever said it. James knows this. He has watched it, and his insistence on the seriousness of speech is not the insistence of a person who overvalues words in the abstract. It is the insistence of a pastor who has watched words do damage that no subsequent apology fully repaired. The third reason is the one that makes James's teaching on the tongue distinctly theological rather than merely ethical. He argues in chapter 3 that blessing God and cursing people who are made in the image of God cannot proceed from the same uncorrupted source. The state of your speech is directly connected to the state of your relationship with God. Not as an external indicator only, but as an integrated reality. The person who is genuinely drawing near to God, genuinely being transformed by encounter with His grace and presence, genuinely being shaped by the wisdom that comes from above. That person's speech will show it. Not immediately, not without struggle, not without a lifetime of ongoing discipline, but the direction will be unmistakable. The practical application of all of this begins with listening, the discipline that James places first, before speaking and before anger. Genuine listening is one of the rarest practices available to a human being, and one of the most transformative. The person who has learned to truly hear, to slow down enough to receive what the other person is actually communicating rather than what they fear or expect the other person to be communicating, has already begun to change the quality of their speech, because so much of destructive speech is a reaction to a misunderstanding. It continues with the discipline of the pause. The space between stimulus and response is the space in which character operates. The person who has cultivated the habit of pausing, of not immediately voicing the first reactive thing that arises in response to a difficult moment, has given themselves the gift of choice. To ask, is what I am about to say true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Will it build something or damage something? Will it serve the person I am speaking to? Or will it serve only my momentary need to discharge something uncomfortable? And it culminates in the long, slow work of interior transformation, of allowing God access to the desires and the wounds and the fears that are the actual source of the most destructive things we say. Because most of the speech that does the most damage does not originate in deliberate cruelty. It originates in pain, in the person who was never told they were enough, who speaks diminishment because diminishment is the language their interior life learned. In the person who has never felt secure, who controls through criticism because criticism temporarily relieves the anxiety of not feeling in control. As the roots are addressed, as the interior life is genuinely transformed by grace, the speech will change, not all at once, not without ongoing effort and ongoing failure and ongoing return to grace, but genuinely, over time, in the direction of life rather than death. A final word on the community James was writing for, and the community we are part of now. It is worth pausing before we close entirely to consider the context in which James wrote this letter. He was writing to people who were scattered, who had been displaced from their original community, who were navigating life in places that were not home, who were facing pressures from the outside world that were genuine and serious. They were not writing from a position of comfort and security. They were writing from the margins, and yet the concerns that James addresses are not the concerns of people who have given up. They are the concerns of people who are still trying, still gathering, still praying, still calling themselves brothers and sisters, still reaching for something better than what they are currently managing. The favoritism he addresses is the favoritism of a community that still cares enough about its integrity to be challenged by the accusation. The inconsistency of faith and works he addresses is the inconsistency of people who still want their faith to be real. The conflicts and the tongue-related failures he addresses are the struggles of people who are still in relationship with each other, still close enough to hurt each other, still committed enough to the community that the failures of community feel worth addressing. James writes to people in process, not to perfect people who need fine-tuning, not to people who have it all figured out, to people who are genuinely trying to live by faith in a world that makes that difficult in different ways in every generation, who keep failing in recognizable, human, unglamorous ways, and who need to be told the truth about those failures with enough love that the truth does not crush them, but with enough honesty that the truth does not merely comfort them while leaving them unchanged. That is the community James was writing to. And it is, in its deepest and most essential contours, the community that we are part of right now. The setting is different, the specific pressures are different, but the human reality is the same. We are people who believe and who fail to live up to what we believe, who are being slowly and imperfectly formed into something better by a grace we did not earn and cannot manufacture, who need each other's honesty and patience and genuine presence in order to make it through. James offers no shortcuts. He makes no promises about the ease of the process. He does not suggest that transformation happens quickly or without the ongoing discipline of returning again and again to the same truths and allowing them to do their work a little deeper each time. What he does offer is the assurance, repeated in different forms throughout the letter, that the God who is doing this work in you and through you is faithful, that the wisdom he gives is real wisdom, that the grace he pours on the humble is sufficient for the humbling the process requires, that the trials he permits have a purpose, that the end of the Lord, the conclusion of the story, the place where patient endurance eventually arrives, is full of compassion and mercy. That is the promise you are living inside. Not the promise that every day will be easy, or that every prayer will produce the outcome you hoped for, or that the gap between who you are and who you are called to be will close faster than it seems to be closing, but the promise that the one who began the work will be faithful to complete it, that the testing of your faith is working something real and durable and eternally valuable, that the wisdom you need is available for the asking, and the grace you need is available for the humbling, and the community you need is available in the gathering of people around the same word, across every time zone and every culture and every season of history, who are trying imperfectly, persistently together to let the book of James do what it was always written to do. One more truth worth sitting with: the letter of James is not finished with you after one reading. There is something unusual about the Epistle of James that becomes apparent to anyone who returns to it more than once, who reads it in a season of comfortable faith and then returns in a season of genuine trial, who first encounters it as a young believer and then reads it again decades later with the accumulated weight of experience pressing on every line. The letter grows, not because the words change, but because you do. The truth it contains is not the kind that is absorbed in a single encounter and then filed away, understood and settled. It is the kind that continues to find new ground in you as you continue to grow, as life continues to expose new ground in you that the truth has not yet fully occupied. The person who reads Truth 1 about counting trials as joy in a comfortable season will read it differently after they have been through something that genuinely cost them. The person who reads Truth 11 about faith without works being dead will understand it at a deeper level after they have had the experience of seeing faith come alive in a moment of concrete, costly action. The person who reads Truth 29 about Elijah being a man subject to like passions as we are will receive that observation with a relief they did not know they needed the first time, and with an even deeper relief the third or fourth time, after more of their own ordinariness has been fully revealed to them through the accumulated experience of trying and failing and returning and trying again. This is the nature of living truth, truth that is alive because it was breathed out by the living God into a letter written by a man who had walked with Jesus, who had watched the resurrection change everything, and who had given his life to helping people understand that following Jesus was not merely a change of belief, but a change of everything. James was eventually martyred for his faith. The person who wrote these hard truths about the tongue and favoritism and faith and works and prayer and patience paid the ultimate price for the truth he preached. He knew from the inside what it cost to live what he wrote. These are not the words of a theoretical teacher offering abstract wisdom from a comfortable distance. These are the words of a person who had put his whole life on the line in exactly the direction his words point, who had counted trials as joy when the trials were real and serious and ultimately fatal. That does not make the truths easier to live, but it makes them real in a way that purely theoretical instruction never quite achieves. And it means that when you find a particular truth in this letter genuinely difficult to apply, when the instruction to be slow to anger feels impossible in the moment, when the demand for doing rather than just hearing feels overwhelming in its scope, when the portrait of dead faith causes something in you to squirm in uncomfortable recognition, you are in the company of someone who understood exactly how difficult it is and who wrote the words anyway. Out of love for people he believed were capable of more, you are capable of more. That is what James is saying across every verse and every chapter and every one of these 33 hard truths. Not more by your own effort alone, not more by a grinding application of willpower to a list of moral requirements, but more by the grace that is available to the humble, more by the wisdom that is given generously to those who ask in faith, more by the transforming work of the living word, received not as a hearer only, but as a doer, a person who looks in the mirror and stays with what they see long enough for it to change them. The question James leaves you with, and the one you cannot avoid. Every serious encounter with the book of James ends with a question, not a comfortable, open-ended question that allows for a range of acceptable answers. A specific, pointed, personally uncomfortable question that the letter seems to press into the hands of the reader as they set it down and go back to their ordinary life. The question is simply this: is it alive? Is your faith alive? Not in theory, not on the best version of your most spiritually elevated day, in practice, in the average Tuesday. In the conversation you are about to have with the person who consistently tests your patience. in the choice you are about to make about what to do with the resource in your hands, in the moment coming up when you will have the option to speak and the option to stay silent, and only one of those options serves the other person. Is the faith alive there? Does it move? Does it produce something? Does it make a visible difference in what you do, not just in what you believe? If the answer is yes, if there is genuine movement, genuine fruit, genuine evidence of transformation in the direction that James has spent 5 chapters describing, then celebrate that, not pridefully, but with genuine gratitude to the God whose grace produced it. You did not produce it yourself, you received it. And what has been given deserves to be received with open hands and a grateful heart. If the answer is not yet, if the honest assessment of your life against the mirror James has held up produces more recognition of the gap than celebration of the fruit, then receive that too, not with despair, not with the kind of self-condemnation that paralyzes rather than motivates, but with the honest, mobilizing grief that James describes in chapter 4, the grief that draws near to God, the grief that acknowledges the distance and turns toward the one who promises to close it. Draw near, the path is open, the door is not locked. The God who gives generously to all without reproach is not waiting for you to earn your way back to proximity before he will respond. Draw near, that is all. Just draw near, and he will draw near to you. That is the promise. It is old. It has been tested by millions of people across thousands of years in every kind of circumstance and season, and it has never failed, not once. Not in the first century when James wrote it to scattered, suffering, struggling believers doing their best with what they had. Not in any century since, and not today. Not for you, wherever you are watching from, whatever the current gap between your profession and your practice, whatever the weight of the trials you are carrying, whatever the state of your tongue and your faith and your prayer life and your patience and your integrity of speech, the promise holds. Draw near. He will draw near to you, and in that nearness, in that restored and deepening proximity, everything James has written about, the tongue that heals rather than harms, the faith that moves rather than sits still, the wisdom that is peaceable and gentle and full of mercy, the patience that endures until the coming of the Lord, the community that confesses and prays and goes after the wandering, all of it becomes not merely the demand of a rigorous teacher, but the natural, overflowing, gradually more consistent expression of a life that is genuinely near to the God who is the source of every good and perfect gift. That is the life James was writing for. That is the life that is available to you. And that is the life, imperfect, ongoing, costly, deeply worthwhile, that we hope you carry out of this time together and into every day that follows. We have come to the end of this video, and before you go, we want to say one more time from the sincerest place in us. If this content has meant something to you today, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what is coming next. Like this video, that single act helps it reach more people who need exactly what you found here. Share it with someone who is searching. And if you feel led to go deeper with this community, become a channel member and step into the inner circle of people who are serious about taking the word seriously. The link is right below. May the God who gives wisdom generously and without reproach bless you abundantly as you go from here. May his word take root in the deepest soil of your life and bear fruit that endures through every season. May your yes be yes and your no be no. May your tongue become an instrument of healing in every space it enters. May your faith find its completion in love, made visible and costly and real. And may you be found at the end of your race among those who endured to the finish and received what the Lord has promised to those who love him. The crown of life that does not fade, worn in the presence of the Father of lights. in whose hands every perfect gift has always rested, and in whose presence every trial and every patient endurance and every act of love done in faith and finished well will finally and fully make sense. God bless you. We will see you in the next video.